If you're a beginner knife maker and you're wanting to learn how to get better at making knife handles, then you're definitely in the right place because I'm going to go over that right now. So if you're interested in learning more about making knives and improving your skills as a bladesmith, then you should definitely consider subscribing because that is what I teach and that's what I go over on this channel. And in this video, I'm going to go over how to fit up a full tang knife handle because that's what most beginners tend to start with. And if you're just starting out, it's going to be the least technical and simplest one to go forward, and it produces a very strong handle. It's not too complicated and it gives you great results. All right, so this is the knife I'm going to be showing you how to do this on. This is just a coarse finish hunting knife that I made, and I'm doing all of this after heat treatment. I do the handles after heat treatment, but I do drill the pinholes before heat treatment. All you really need to do for that is just make sure that the steel is soft. Don't do it hardened or anything like that. Also, hopefully this will help somebody. These are Performax drill bits. These are the best drill bits I've ever had. They're the best ones I've ever used, and they're cheap. This whole pack, it's a 10-pack, and it was $11. I did over 40 knife handles with one of these without it getting too dull to use, and it performed really, really well. So these are the drill bits that I recommend above any others. All right, now I'm at the belt sander, and the first thing that you want to do is, first of all, get your scales. I'm using walnut scales. This is a wood that's hard enough to make knife handles out of without it being stabilized, but this applies if you're making them out of any sort of wood, composite, anything like that. The first thing that you want to do with a full tang knife is make everything fit up with no gaps. The easiest and fastest way to do this, and the most common, is to just make everything as flat as you can so that the gaps close. So to do this, I normally use a belt sander if I'm doing this. You can also do this before heat treatment, but you may want to go over this all again in case the handle warps or something like that, depending on if you heat treat everything and just temper it back, or if you only heat treat the blade. Regardless, it's good to do this process to make sure everything's flat. What you may notice is that when I put this flat, let's say I want the handle scales to come up to right about here. If the top of this plate goes right here, I'll just line those up and put flat pressure against this, and you'll see there's a gap that shows up, so it doesn't have any contact above where the top of this plate is. Now this one's worn off a little bit, so the point of contact may be more like right here than right here. But the reason it does this is because this plate right here is actually stepped out. It's adjusted out a little bit from this wheel. And even on this cheaper belt sander that uses 1x30-inch belts, you can see that plate right there. It does the same thing because it's adjusted for it. I know the lighting's kind of bad in this shot, but even the cheap 1x30-inch belt sander from Harbor Freight has adjustment to do this. So you can do this on any belt sander pretty much, as long as it's not a wood belt sander for something like wood. And I'm mostly talking about like the 4x36 or the 6x36. All right, so once you're done, you'll have something that looks like this. So if you look at this handle, you will see some hammer marks in it. Those aren't really a problem, especially if they're in the middle. You just need to have full contact around the entire border of the handle. Really, the outside edge is all you need to flatten, because as long as that's making full contact with the scale, the epoxy will fill in the rest on the inside, and there's not going to be a gap that anything like moisture could get into to cause any sort of rot or corrosion or anything like that. So this is going to be filled in with epoxy and will leave no visible gap, and the rest of this will have no gap that will be able to get any moisture or anything like that in there. So don't worry too much about that. So the tang is flattened, the scales are both flattened, and they all fit up very, very nicely. So the next thing to do is to drill the holes in the scales. All right, so this is one step that a lot of people do a little bit differently, and there's not really a wrong way to do it as long as the results are good. So the most important thing is to make sure that when you do this, the insides of the scales are touching each other. For example, this is how the knife is going to be glued up. So just pull this out. Now you have the insides on the insides and the outsides on the outsides. Now you can do this on the outside or something like that if they're flat enough, which I believe these are. What I really do is I just put these in a vise. Now you will need a scrap piece of wood. So let me grab one of those. I'm just using this 2x4. It does not have to be any specific one. Now this is how I do it without using a drill press. If you have a drill press, you can just use the drill press for this. But I'm going to show you how to do it without one because not everybody has one. So line everything up how you want it. And then clamp that corner. Now you can see the holes are exposed. Just the corner of the jaw has that. And then you have the scales, insides to insides. And you have this piece of wood. That will prevent tear out from happening on the outside of this other scale. Made a little contact, but that's all right. All right, the next step is just opening this up. Now you can see there's no tear out. This was the side that came through. This is the side that went in. Everything is good and not splintered or anything. So this can all be sanded and finished. So open this up and then you want to mark everything. So I'm just going to use a pencil, line up the holes. I just do this by eye. And then mark this with a pencil. This is really going to help you know where to put epoxy and help you measure out how much epoxy you need so that you don't waste anything. Next, cut out the pins. So I just do this by putting everything together, seeing how thick it is. And then I just line it up. Just about like that. Leave a little bit of extra room in case you need to rivet them or something like that. Now at this stage, if you want to cut off the excess material, you can do that with a bandsaw, you could use a file, you could use a belt sander, anything like that, or you can glue it up as it is and just do it all afterwards. It's just profiling at this point, so you can use a rasp or a file or a bandsaw or a belt sander. You could use an angle grinder with a like a sanding disc as well. There's some options. Okay, the next step on the list is to shape the front of the scale. So you can see that the handle should be going this direction. So put these together, or you don't have to do them both at the same time. But you want to take that corner off and do all of the finishing on this face before you glue it up. All right, once you have the front of them all sanded to wherever you want to finish at, you can go ahead and glue it up. Now I'm going to use a beginner-friendly or a pretty common beginner epoxy. This is just 2-part Gorilla Glue epoxy. It sets up in 5 minutes. I've used this for a lot of knives. I do recommend, however, cutting this in half. I use side cuts for this. You can use a knife as well because sometimes an air pocket will get in place of the epoxy and it'll displace the epoxy that should be mixed together, so you'll get one side more than the other. Now, some people mix this up in a dish or a cup. I just mix it on the scale. There's not really a reason you need to mix it somewhere else and then pour it on. I've even seen people mix it on another flat surface. There we go. I got a little bit too much of the darker one, but that's okay because if I get too much, I'll just put it on the other scale and then I won't add quite as much. Now, you can spread this all inside of that traced line, and that's why we did this, to make it easier to spread it without wasting any, or certainly without wasting as much. Epoxy also really clogs sanding belts, so you want to use as little of it as possible. Any extra that just squeezes out is going to squeeze out and get in the way of the sanding belts. All right, I'm going to put the pins and just give the pins a coat of epoxy that'll help hold them in place. It's not common, but there has been times I've needed to use a hammer to get this on. If the holes weren't lined up perfectly correctly, I will need to use something. Now, when you put this front clamp on, you're probably going to notice a little bit of epoxy is going to squeeze out and get on the side of the knife blade. You want to wipe that off immediately. So make sure that you have a paper towel or a rag or a scraper or something ready to get rid of that as soon as you see it for the first time, because it's very hard to get that off afterwards. There we go. This up here is really the only place that you need to get the squeeze out off, because the rest of it can be sanded off. Okay, so while that's gluing up, I do want to ask you, what are some other handle types that you would like to learn how to make in your own workshop? I'll make videos depending on what kind of requests I get. That'll just help me to know better how to make content that's going to be the most helpful to anybody who's watching this. I am going to continue this build on a different knife. This is a very similar knife, and I've glued it up the same way as I did the other one. I'm just going to finish it because that one's going to take a while to glue up, and this is one I have sitting in my shop ready to go. The glue is dry. Other than that, they're at the exact same stage. So I have it chucked up in a vise, and the first thing I'm going to do is take a file and just flatten the pins, because when I cut them with side cuts, it leaves a taper and it leaves a point. And I just want to get rid of that so that it's not in the way, because that can fold over if you hammer them, and make it so that they don't lay down quite right. And sometimes you can get kind of a fold or a cold shut on the pin. If you're not riveting them, you can just sand these all the way down with a file or a belt sander. A belt sander, though, you just don't want to get them too hot because it can melt the epoxy and it can let go. All right, next I am going to hammer these, just rivet these out. I have this on my anvil. I'm using a ball peen hammer. All right, the next step is going to be profiling the handle, just doing the handle profile. We're not worried about thickness or shape yet. We're just going to profile it. I did not do this before gluing it up, so I have quite a bit of material to remove. And the reason I didn't do it beforehand is because I like to do it after the way that I do it using a draw knife. A lot of people use a bandsaw or a belt sander to do this. I used to use a belt sander, but I found this is a lot faster, and it also saves a lot of abrasives. It's faster than a bandsaw. It's faster than a bandsaw, but it saves abrasives on the belt sander. Okay, so I just chuck it up in a vise. Now, you may notice that I actually tilted the blade up a little bit, which tilted the tang down. That actually makes it so that I can cut through the grains in the wood, and if they split, it'll split away from the tang. So I do it this way. That makes it so I can cut pretty close without it splitting down into the glue. Okay, I'm going to do the rest of the profiling on belt sander. All right, once I have that done, I'm going to go on the sides and I'm going to make sure that they are the right thickness and that they are even. So one side isn't thicker than the other. Okay, once I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the corners off of the entire border of the handle. Now I'm just going to take the corners off of the whole handle and start to get a feel for how the knife handle will turn out before I get to final shape. So once you take the corners off, now is the time to test fit it. Let it cool down first, but test fit it and see how you like it. And then just keep taking smaller and smaller corners off until it's about right. You can do this with a belt sander for a while, but then it's good to switch to either a file or sandpaper. All right, I've got this handle pretty rounded off how I want it. It feels like it's supposed to. It's got a good grip to it. It's comfortable. I'm not really going to go any coarser or any finer than this because it is a rustic knife, so I don't feel the need to hand sand this handle up to, 400 grit or something like that. But this is actually a 120 grit finish. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and now we'll go into the next step, which is oiling. So you can use pretty much any like standard, whatever someone would use for handle oil for a knife. You could use coconut oil. You could use olive oil. What's some of the other ones? You can use linseed oil. I don't know that it's really recommended to use linseed oil, but a lot of people use it for different projects. But I would stick to something that's food safe in general, and you'll be better off. So let that dry. I recommend just sticking it in a cardboard box or something. And it'll just hold it in the air so it'll dry. So you won't get any smudges from it laying on its side or something like that. You can also stick this in a vise. I just use a cardboard box because usually while it's drying, I'm working on something else and I need the vise. All right, and when it's all said and done, you should end up with something that looks like this. So this is a very good beginner-friendly knife handle that's very functional and looks very sharp. You can see the wood grain in there. If you were to hand sand this finer, then you'd be able to see the grain a little bit more clearly. It'd be a little bit more defined, but that's how you do it. So that's how you fit up a knife handle. And if you're interested in learning more about making knives and growing that craft into a small business, then you should definitely subscribe and check out my knife making course. I work with knife makers who are beginners to help them achieve these goals. So until next time, stay safe, have fun, and I'll see you in the next one.